Savannah Ashford adjusted her diamond tennis bracelet as she stepped out of her white BMW X5 in the executive parking garage of Ashford & Associates Financial Services. At 26, she embodied everything her father Harrison Ashford had built, his empire around. Pristine appearance, Ivy League education, and an unshakable belief in the natural order of success. The December Chicago wind couldn't penetrate the warmth of her designer coat or the bubble of privilege that surrounded her like armor. "Good morning, Miss Ashford," chirped Bethany, the receptionist, as Savannah glided through the marble lobby of the 42nd floor offices. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, and the scent of expensive coffee wafted from the executive break room. Savannah nodded politely, but distantly. Acknowledging help was proper, but real connection wasn't necessary. Her corner office overlooked Lake Michigan, a view that reminded her daily of her elevated position in the world. As Senior Vice President of Client Relations, a title that had more to do with her last name than her MBA from Northwestern, Savannah managed the firm's wealthiest accounts with the same casual confidence she'd inherited along with her trust fund. "The Pemberton portfolio needs reviewing," announced her assistant, Crystal, placing a stack of documents on the mahogany desk. "Also, your father wants to see you before the department meeting." Savannah barely looked up from her phone, where she was coordinating dinner plans at Le Bernardin with her boyfriend, Preston Blackwell III, whose family owned half of downtown Chicago's commercial real estate. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. And Crystal, make sure someone from maintenance fixes that squeaky wheel on the mail cart. It's becoming disruptive." The complaint rolled off her tongue naturally. In Savannah's world, problems existed, to be solved by other people, preferably people she never had to think about again. She'd grown up in Winnetka, attended private schools where the annual tuition exceeded most people's salaries, and surrounded herself with others who shared her assumptions about merit, success, and the proper functioning of society. Walking toward her father's office, Savannah passed the bullpen where junior analysts worked in cramped cubicles. She noticed one of them, a tall black man she'd seen around but never really registered, helping an elderly janitor lift a heavy box. The sight irritated her for reasons she couldn't articulate. Didn't he understand that networking upward was more important than wasting time with maintenance staff? "Savannah, sweetheart." Harrison Ashford rose from behind his massive desk, his silver hair perfectly styled and his Armani suit impeccable. At 62, he commanded respect through presence and the kind of old money confidence that never needed to be aggressive. "I wanted to discuss the Christmas party arrangements. Make sure you're visible, charming, and appropriately connected to our biggest clients." "Of course, Daddy." The word came naturally, even in professional settings. Harrison had never asked her to call him anything else. And why would she? Their relationship was built on mutual understanding. She represented the future of Ashford family excellence, and he provided the platform for that excellence to shine. The Weatherbys will be there, along with the Harringtons and the Kensington. Group leadership. Preston's family, naturally. "These relationships matter, darling. They're the foundation of everything we've built." Harrison's voice carried the weight of generations of careful social cultivation. Savannah nodded, already mentally selecting her outfit. The annual Christmas party was theater as much as celebration, a chance to display the firm's success and the family's continued prominence in Chicago's financial elite. She'd worn the same smile at dozens of similar events, charmed the same circles of influence, and never questioned why these particular people deserved her attention, while others remained invisible. As she prepared to leave, Harrison added casually, "Oh, and darling, I'm promoting that young analyst, Jerome Washington, to junior portfolio manager. Exceptional performance metrics, apparently. Make sure to include him in the appropriate client meetings." The name meant nothing to her, but Savannah filed it away, with the dozens of other personnel decisions that crossed her awareness without truly registering. Another worker. Another cog in the machine that generated the lifestyle she'd always known. She had no reason to think this promotion would change anything, especially not the careful boundaries that kept her world exactly as comfortable and predictable as she preferred. "Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here." Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts, yes, every single comment, and it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. Savannah's penthouse apartment in Lincoln Park reflected the same careful curation as her professional life. Minimalist furniture, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed the Chicago skyline into personal decor. She poured herself a glass of Chateau Margaux, a gift from Preston's father, and settled onto her Italian leather sofa to call her mother. "Darling, how was your day?" Victoria Ashford's voice carried the refined cadence of finishing school and decades of charity galas. Even over the phone, she sounded like she was addressing a board of directors rather than her daughter. Productive. "Daddy mentioned promoting someone named Jerome Washington. Do you know anything about him?" Savannah swirled her wine, watching the liquid catch the city lights. Victoria's pause was telling. "I don't know him personally, but I assume your father has his reasons. He's always been good at recognizing talent, regardless of background. Though I do hope he's considering the optics carefully." The unspoken understanding hung between them like expensive perfume. The Ashford family prided themselves on being progressive. They donated to the United Negro College Fund, supported diversity initiatives, and would never dream of using overtly racist language. They were, in their own minds, paragons of enlightened thinking. "Mother, you sound like Grandmother Ashford," Savannah laughed, referring to Harrison's mother, who had passed 5 years earlier but whose opinions still echoed through family conversations. "We're not in the 1950s anymore." "Of course not, sweetheart. I simply think it's important to maintain standards. Excellence should be the only criterion, but we mustn't ignore the reality that some people have advantages others don't. When you give opportunities to those who haven't had the same preparation, you're really doing them a kindness by holding them to appropriate expectations." Savannah nodded, though her mother couldn't see her. This logic had shaped her worldview since childhood. The belief that her family's success resulted purely from merit, that their advantages were earned rather than inherited, and that helping others meant maintaining the same systems that had elevated the Ashfords to prominence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Preston. "Dinner tomorrow with the Weatherbys. Dad wants to discuss the Michigan Avenue development. Wear something that says serious investor but still looks amazing on you." She smiled at the message. Preston understood her world perfectly because he'd been born into the same rarefied air. His text messages read like strategic briefings because in their circle, every social interaction served multiple purposes. Romance and business intertwined seamlessly when both families operated at the same level of influence. "Are you listening, darling?" Victoria's voice pulled her back to the conversation. "Sorry, Mother. Preston was texting about tomorrow's dinner." "Wonderful boy. His family's development projects are exactly the kind of forward-thinking investments Chicago needs. Speaking of which, I ran into Constance Pemberton at the club today. She mentioned that their portfolio manager, someone new, had some rather unconventional ideas about diversifying their holdings." Savannah frowned. The Pembertons were one of Ashford and Associates' oldest clients, their wealth spanning 4 generations, of careful investment and strategic marriages. Unconventional how? Something about community development funds and minority-owned businesses. Constance seemed surprised by the suggestion. She's used to more traditional approaches, you know. Blue-chip stocks, established markets, proven strategies. The criticism was wrapped in diplomatic language, but Savannah understood perfectly. In their world, unconventional meant risky. Community development meant charity rather than serious investment, and minority-owned businesses represented social consciousness rather than financial wisdom. These weren't necessarily conscious prejudices. They were simply the natural conclusions of people who'd learned to equate their own success with superior judgment. "I should probably review that account more closely," Savannah mused, already planning to examine whatever recommendations had been made. As Senior Vice President of Client Relations, protecting established clients from inappropriate risks was part of her responsibility. That's my sensible daughter. You have such good instincts about these things. Your father raised you to understand that success comes from making careful choices, not from trying to fix every social problem through investment strategy. After ending the call, Savannah stood at her windows, looking down at the city below. From 40 stories up, Chicago looked orderly, manageable, beautiful. The people were too small to see individually, which suited her perfectly. She preferred humanity in the abstract, worth supporting through appropriate charitable contributions, but not requiring personal engagement or the messy complications of individual stories. She'd learned this perspective from birth. The Ashfords supported worthy causes, donated generously to approved organizations, and hired based on qualifications they'd learned to recognize. They weren't prejudiced, they were simply discerning. The difference in their minds was crucial and entirely justified by their continued success. The next morning brought the monthly client presentation meeting, where junior staff reported on portfolio performance to senior management and select investors. Savannah arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and positioned herself at the conference table where she could observe everyone's performance without seeming to scrutinize. "Good morning, everyone," Harrison Ashford called, the meeting to order with the easy authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to lead. "I'm particularly interested in hearing from our newest junior portfolio manager about the Pemberton account strategies." Savannah looked up from her notes as Jerome Washington entered the conference room. She'd noticed him briefly in the hallway yesterday, but seeing him now in a professional context, she was struck by his composure. Tall and lean, with close-cropped hair and an expensive but not ostentatious suit, he moved with quiet confidence that somehow annoyed her. He should look more grateful, more aware of the opportunity he'd been given. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford." Jerome's voice was measured, professional, with the kind of neutral accent that suggested conscious effort to eliminate any regional or cultural markers. "I've reviewed the Pemberton portfolio extensively and identified several opportunities for strategic diversification." As he began his presentation, Savannah found herself critiquing not just his recommendations, but his entire demeanor. He was articulate, perhaps too articulate, as if he were trying to prove something. His slides were well-designed, but included charts showing community impact alongside financial returns, which struck her as unnecessarily complicated. Why couldn't he simply focus on profit maximization like everyone else? The minority-owned business sector has shown remarkable resilience during market downturns, Jerome continued. And investing in community development funds actually provides stable, long-term returns while building economic infrastructure in underserved markets. Savannah shifted in her chair. There was that word again, community. In her experience, when financial advisors started talking about community impact, it usually meant they were prioritizing social causes over their clients' actual interests. She glanced around the room, noting that several senior partners looked politely skeptical. "Mr. Washington," she interjected smoothly, "while community development is certainly admirable, shouldn't our primary focus be maximizing returns for our clients? The Pembertons have trusted us for generations based on our commitment to proven strategies." Jerome met her gaze directly, which surprised her. Most junior staff members deferred to her immediately, understanding the family hierarchy without needing explanation. "Ms. Ashford, with respect, these aren't charity investments. The data shows that diverse portfolios, including minority-owned businesses and community development funds, often outperform traditional portfolios over 5- and 10-year periods. Data can be interpreted many ways," Savannah replied, her tone remaining pleasant while making her skepticism clear. "Experience suggests that established markets provide more reliable outcomes. Perhaps you could focus your research on time-tested approaches that align with our clients' expectations." The suggestion wasn't quite in order, but everyone in the room understood the power dynamics at play. Jerome nodded politely, though Savannah noticed he didn't look chastened the way she'd expected. Instead, He seemed to be studying her, as if trying to understand something that puzzled him. After the meeting, Savannah walked to the elevator with Claudia Thornton, the firm's senior partner and her father's longtime friend. Claudia had mentored Savannah through her early years at the company and understood the delicate balance between family leadership and professional competence. "Interesting presentation," Claudia commented as they waited for the elevator. "The young man certainly did his homework, perhaps too much homework on the wrong subjects," Savannah replied. "I worry that he's been influenced by academic theories rather than practical experience. The Pembertons don't need their portfolio manager to solve social problems. They need consistent, reliable growth." Claudia nodded thoughtfully. "It's a challenge when bright young people come in with fresh perspectives. Sometimes they need guidance about which battles are worth fighting and which clients require more traditional approaches." The elevator arrived, and as they stepped inside, Savannah caught sight of Jerome Washington in the hallway, shaking hands with Marcus Chen, one of the firm's most successful junior partners. They were laughing about something, looking comfortable and collegial in a way that struck her as presumptuous. Jerome had been promoted just days ago. Shouldn't he be more focused on proving himself rather than networking socially? "I think I'll schedule some one-on-one time with Mr. Washington," Savannah decided aloud. "Make sure he understands how we maintain client relationships here." "Good idea," Claudia agreed. "Sometimes people need explicit guidance about company culture. It's actually a kindness. Better they learn the expectations early than struggle unnecessarily." As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Savannah felt satisfied with her decision. She wasn't being discriminatory. She was being mentoring. Jerome Washington was clearly intelligent and had earned his promotion through performance. But he needed to understand that success at Ashford and Associates required more than good numbers. It required understanding their clients, their expectations, and the professional standards that had built the firm's reputation over 3 generations. She would help him succeed by teaching him to focus on what really mattered, delivering results that satisfied their established clientele without unnecessary complications or social experimentation. It was, she told herself, exactly the kind of thoughtful leadership her father had taught her to provide. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the firm's main lobby, where Savannah was escorting Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton to the elevator after their quarterly review meeting. At 82, Mrs. Pemberton embodied old Chicago money. Her family had founded one of the city's first department stores, and her investments with Ashford and Associates spanned 4 decades of consistent conservative growth. "I simply don't understand why anyone would suggest putting money into, what did he call them? Community development funds?" Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried the particular disdain of someone who'd never questioned her own advantages. "It sounds like charity masquerading as investment strategy." Savannah was formulating a diplomatic response when Jerome Washington emerged from the stairwell, slightly out of breath and carrying a thick folder of documents. He'd obviously been rushing to catch up with them, and his urgency suggested something important. "Mrs. Pemberton," he called out, his professional smile intact despite his haste. "I'm so glad I caught you. I have the additional research you requested about the Community Development Fund performance metrics." Savannah felt her jaw tighten. She had specifically told Jerome to focus on traditional investment options for Mrs. Pemberton, and here he was directly contradicting her guidance in front of their most conservative client. "Research?" Mrs. Pemberton looked confused, glancing between Savannah and Jerome. "I didn't request any research, young man." "I apologize for the misunderstanding," Jerome replied smoothly. "I thought you might be interested in seeing how these investments have actually performed compared to traditional portfolios over the past decade. The returns are quite compelling." "Mr. Washington," Savannah interjected, her voice carrying a warning that any experienced employee would have recognized. "Immediately. Mrs. Pemberton and I have already discussed her portfolio strategy for the coming quarter. Perhaps we could schedule a separate meeting if she's interested in additional options." But Jerome didn't back down the way she'd expected. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Pemberton with the kind of respectful attention that somehow managed to bypass Savannah's authority entirely. "Ma'am, I understand that new investment approaches can seem risky, but I've analyzed your portfolio's historical performance, and I believe these additions could increase your annual returns by 2 to 3% while actually reducing overall volatility." Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly. At her age and wealth level, she'd learned to recognize competence when she heard it, regardless of where it came from. 2 to 3%? Yes, ma'am. These aren't speculative investments. They're established funds with 10-year track records that consistently outperform the S&P 500. I have the data right here if you'd like to review it. Savannah felt the situation slipping away from her control. Mrs. Pemberton was actually listening to Jerome's pitch, her expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. This wasn't how client relationships were supposed to work at Ashford and Associates. Senior family members guided strategy. Junior staff implemented decisions. Having a new employee directly appeal to established clients violated every protocol. Savannah had been raised to respect. "Mr. Washington," she said more firmly, "I think we should discuss this internally before presenting additional options to Mrs. Pemberton. We wouldn't want to overwhelm her with too many choices." The condescension in her voice was subtle but unmistakable, and for the first time since she'd known him, Jerome's professional demeanor cracked slightly. His eyes flashed with something that looked like disappointment rather than anger. "Ms. Ashford, with respect, Mrs. Pemberton is one of the most sophisticated investors I've ever encountered. Her questions about portfolio diversification yesterday were extremely insightful, and I think she's more than capable of evaluating additional data points." The lobby suddenly felt very quiet. Two junior associates walking toward the elevator had slowed their pace, obviously listening to the exchange. Crystal, Savannah's assistant, was watching from the reception desk with undisguised interest. Even the security guard seemed to be paying attention. Mrs. Pemberton looked between them, with the sharp assessment of someone who'd spent decades navigating Chicago society and understood power dynamics instinctively. "Young man, what did you say your name was?" "Jerome Washington, ma'am. I've been managing your account for the past month, and you've been doing your homework, apparently." She turned to Savannah with a slight smile. "Dear, I think I would like to see that research. Not to make any immediate changes, you understand, but I've always believed that informed decisions are better decisions." Savannah felt heat rising in her cheeks. She'd been outmaneuvered by a junior employee in front of one of their most important clients, and worse, Mrs. Pemberton seemed impressed by Jerome's initiative rather than put off by his presumption. "Of course," Savannah managed, her voice tight, with barely controlled irritation. "Mr. Washington can schedule a follow-up meeting to present his additional research." As Mrs. Pemberton walked toward the elevator, she paused and looked back at Jerome. "Young man, I appreciate thoroughness. Too many people in this business tell me what they think I want to hear rather than what I need to know." After the elevator doors closed, Savannah and Jerome stood alone in the lobby. The silence stretched between them, filled with the tension of boundaries crossed and expectations shattered. "Ms. Ashford," Jerome began carefully, "I wasn't trying to undermine your client relationship. I genuinely believe these investment options could benefit Mrs. Pemberton's portfolio." "That's not the point," Savannah replied, her careful professionalism finally giving way to real frustration. "The point is protocol, Mr. Washington, chain of command, client management procedures that have worked successfully for this firm since before you were born." Jerome studied her face for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. A recognition that this conversation was about much more than investment strategies or professional protocols. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll make sure to coordinate all client communications through you in the future." As he walked toward the stairs, Savannah felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been regret. She'd won the confrontation, established her authority, and protected the firm's established procedures. So why did victory feel so hollow? That evening, Savannah couldn't concentrate on her usual routine. She'd attempted to review client portfolios, responded to emails with uncharacteristic brevity, and found herself staring out her office window long after most of the staff had gone home. The confrontation with Jerome Washington replayed in her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming, annoying and persistent. Preston had texted twice about their dinner plans, but she'd begged off, claiming a headache. The truth was more complicated. She needed space to process what had happened, and Preston's inevitable questions about her day would require explanations she wasn't ready to give. Her phone rang just after 7 o'clock. Harrison Ashford's name appeared on the screen, and Savannah felt her stomach tighten. Had Mrs. Pemberton called him about the lobby incident? "Hi, Daddy." "Sweetheart, I just got off the phone with Eleanor Pemberton. Apparently young Washington made quite an impression today." Savannah closed her eyes. "I can explain." "No need to explain anything, darling. Eleanor was impressed by his research and his knowledge of her portfolio. She specifically asked me to make sure he has the resources to prepare a comprehensive presentation for her next visit." The words hit her like cold water. Mrs. Pemberton hadn't complained about Jerome's presumption. She'd praised his initiative. Suddenly, Savannah's defense of protocol looked less like leadership and more like obstruction. "I see," she managed. "Savannah, is everything all right? You sound stressed." How could she explain that she felt unsettled by her own behavior without admitting that she might have been wrong? Harrison had raised her to be confident in her judgment, to trust her instincts about people and situations. Questioning those instincts now felt like questioning everything he'd taught her about success and leadership. "I'm fine, Daddy, just tired." "Well, get some rest. And Savannah, make sure Washington has whatever support he needs for Mrs. Pemberton's presentation. She's been with us for 40 years. We want to keep her happy." After hanging up, Savannah sat alone in her office, surrounded by the trappings of inherited success. Her diplomas hung on the wall in expensive frames. Her desk was made of wood older than most of the firm's employees, and her view of Lake Michigan reminded her daily of her elevated position in the world. Yet for the first time in her adult life, she wondered if elevation might also mean isolation. She found herself thinking about Jerome's expression when she'd suggested that Mrs. Pemberton might be overwhelmed by too many investment options. The flash of disappointment in his eyes had been genuine, and it had been directed not at her authority, but at her assumption about their client's capabilities. He'd seen something in Mrs. Pemberton that Savannah had missed, intellectual curiosity rather than fragile conservatism. Her phone buzzed with a text from her college roommate, Taylor Morrison, who now worked as a civil rights attorney in New York. "Saw your firm's diversity report in the financial press. Looks like you guys are finally catching up with the 21st century. How's it going with the new hires?" Savannah stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Fine. Learning curves for everyone." Taylor's response came immediately. "That's code for culture clash, isn't it? I remember how shocked you were freshman year when you found out I was on financial aid. Sometimes the most privileged people have the hardest time recognizing competence when it doesn't look familiar." The observation stung because it was delivered without malice. Just matter-of-fact assessment from someone who'd known Savannah since they were 18 and idealistic. Taylor had watched her navigate the social complexities of college, where Savannah's automatic assumptions about wealth, class, and merit had been challenged by classmates who'd achieved the same academic success through very different paths. Savannah remembered one particular conversation during their sophomore year, when Taylor had gently pointed out that Savannah's summer internships weren't necessarily more valuable than Taylor's summer job at a community legal clinic. They were just different types of learning experiences. At the time, Savannah had dismissed the comparison as false equivalency. Tonight, she wondered if she'd been too quick to dismiss perspectives that didn't match her own experience. She locked her office and walked to the parking garage, where her BMW sat in its reserved spot next to her father's Mercedes and Claudia, Thornton's Lexus. The executive level was nearly empty, a stark contrast to the crowded employee parking on the lower levels. As she drove home through Lincoln Park, she passed the diverse neighborhoods where many of Ashford and Associates' junior employees lived, areas she rarely thought about except as real estate market indicators. At home, she poured herself a glass of wine and called her mother, hoping for the kind of reassuring conversation that usually helped her process challenging days. "Darling, you sound troubled," Victoria observed immediately. "I had an interesting day at work. One of our new employees, the one Daddy promoted, presented some unconventional investment ideas to Mrs. Pemberton." "Oh dear. How did Eleanor react?" "That's the thing, Mother. She was interested. Actually interested. She asked for more research and specifically requested that he present his findings at her next meeting." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Well, Eleanor has always been sharper than people give her credit for. Remember, she built that department store empire herself after her husband died. She's not easily impressed by charm alone." The comment surprised Savannah. She'd always thought of Mrs. Pemberton as a conservative widow living off her late husband's business success, not as a shrewd businesswoman in her own right. "I suppose I just wonder if I might have misjudged the situation," Savannah admitted carefully. "Sweetheart, second-guessing yourself isn't productive. You have excellent instincts. Your father and I have always been proud of your judgment. Sometimes people surprise us, that's all. The important thing is maintaining the standards that have made our family successful." After ending the call, Savannah sat in her living room, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Her mother's reassurance felt hollow tonight, like a comfortable lie rather than meaningful guidance. For the first time in her adult life, she wondered if the standards that had made her family successful might also be limitations that prevented her from recognizing success in others. The thought was deeply unsettling because it suggested that everything she'd learned about merit, achievement, and natural hierarchies might be incomplete. And if those beliefs were wrong, what did that say about the foundation of her entire worldview? Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. Savannah arrived at the office early the next morning with the intention of reviewing Jerome Washington's personnel file and client recommendations more carefully. She told herself this was simple due diligence. Understanding her team members' strengths and approaches was basic management. The truth was more complicated. She needed to understand how she'd misjudged the situation so badly. Jerome's file revealed a background that was both impressive and foreign to her experience. Bachelor's degree in economics from Howard University with a 3.9 GPA. MBA from University of Chicago Booth School of Business, where he'd graduated in the top 10% of his class. 3 years at Goldman Sachs in New York before relocating to Chicago. Recommendation letters that used words like exceptional analytical ability, natural leadership, and innovative thinking. On paper, his qualifications matched or exceeded those of any junior partner at Ashford and Associates. Yet, Savannah realized she'd been expecting him to be grateful for the opportunity rather than confident in his abilities. The recognition made her deeply uncomfortable. Around 10 o'clock, she was reviewing his portfolio recommendations when Crystal knocked on her office door. "Ms. Ashford, there's a situation in the lobby. Mr. Washington is helping with some kind of medical emergency." Savannah followed Crystal to the elevators, where a small crowd had gathered around Leonard Kowalski, the 70-year-old maintenance supervisor who'd worked at Ashford and Associates for 15 years. Leonard was sitting on the marble floor, conscious but obviously distressed, while Jerome knelt beside him, speaking in calm, reassuring tones. "Mr. Kowalski, just keep breathing slowly," Jerome was saying. "The paramedics will be here in a few minutes. You're going to be fine." "I can't. My chest," Leonard gasped, his face pale and sweaty. I know it's scary, but your pulse is steady and you're talking clearly. Those are good signs. My sister's a nurse. She taught me how to recognize the serious symptoms, and you're not showing them. Savannah watched in surprise as Jerome continued talking to Leonard, not with the professional politeness she expected between different levels of employees, but with genuine warmth and concern. Several other staff members stood around looking uncertain, but Jerome had taken charge of the situation with natural authority. "Mr. Washington," Savannah approached carefully. "Should we call his family?" "Already done," Jerome replied without taking his attention off Leonard. "His daughter Maria is on her way. She works at Northwestern Memorial in accounting. I got her number from HR. You know Leonard's daughter?" Savannah asked, startled. Leonard managed a weak smile. "Jerome, he helped Maria when she was applying for the hospital job. Looked over her resume, gave her interview tips. Good man." The paramedics arrived a few minutes later and determined that Leonard had experienced a panic attack brought on by stress and elevated blood pressure, serious but not immediately life-threatening. As they prepared to transport him to the hospital for evaluation, Leonard reached for Jerome's hand. "Thank you, son. You didn't have to—" "Of course I did, Mr. Kowalski. You've been taking care of this building for longer than I've been working. Here, it's the least I can do." As the paramedics left with Leonard, Savannah found herself studying Jerome with new eyes. The easy way he'd interacted with the maintenance supervisor, his knowledge of Leonard's family situation, his calm competence during a medical emergency, it painted a picture of someone who was deeply connected to the people around him, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. "How do you know so much about Leonard's personal life?" she asked as the crowd dispersed. Jerome looked at her with mild surprise, as if the question itself was odd. "We work in the same building, Ms. Ashford. Leonard has been here for 15 years. He knows everyone's story. He told me about Maria's job search when he noticed I was reviewing resumes during lunch one day. I've been mentoring several people in the company informally." "Mentoring?" "Career guidance mostly. Interview, preparation, resume review, networking advice. A lot of people here have potential that isn't being fully utilized." The statement was made without criticism or judgment, but it hit Savannah like an accusation. While she'd been focused on maintaining established protocols and serving existing clients, Jerome had been building relationships across every level of the company. He saw potential where she saw hierarchy. "That's very generous of your time," she managed. "Not really. I learned early that success is a team sport. The people who helped me get here didn't have any obligation to do it either, but they understood that lifting others up doesn't diminish your own achievements." As Jerome walked toward the elevators, Savannah remained in the lobby, processing what she'd witnessed. Her initial assessment of him had been based on a single interaction where he'd challenged her authority. But the emergency with Leonard revealed someone entirely different. Competent, compassionate, and deeply engaged with the community around. Him she thought about her own relationships within the company. Crystal was efficient but distant, their interaction limited to professional necessities. She barely knew the names of most junior staff members, had never spoken to maintenance workers beyond polite greetings, and had never considered that her colleagues might need mentoring or support beyond what the company officially provided. For the first time, she wondered if her elevated position had isolated her from the very people she was supposed to be leading. Jerome's natural authority during the emergency hadn't come from his title or his family name. It had come from genuine relationships and earned respect. The realization was deeply unsettling because it suggested that her understanding of leadership might be fundamentally flawed. If real influence came from connection rather than position, what did that say about the way she'd been taught to navigate the world? Word of Leonard's medical emergency and Jerome's response spread through the office. By lunchtime, morphing into the kind of workplace folklore that reveals underlying tensions and assumptions. By the time Savannah met Preston for dinner at their usual restaurant in Gold Coast, the story had been retold, analyzed, and interpreted through the lens of Ashford and Associates' carefully maintained culture. "I heard your father's new Golden. Boy played hero today." Preston commented as he cut into his dry-aged steak. His tone was light, but Savannah detected an undercurrent of something that might have been mockery or disdain. Jerome Washington helped during a medical emergency, she replied carefully. It was the decent thing to do. Of course it was. I'm just saying that some people have a talent for being in the right place at the right time, especially when there are witnesses around. Preston's smile was sharp. My father always said that the most ambitious people are usually the most helpful in public. The implication hung between them like expensive perfume. Present, but unspoken. Preston was suggesting that Jerome's assistance had been calculated rather than genuine, a performance designed to build his reputation within the company. A month ago, Savannah might have agreed with that assessment. Tonight, it made her uncomfortable. You weren't there, Preston. It didn't seem calculated. Darling, you're too trusting sometimes. These people know how to work the system. They have to. It's not personal. It's strategy. Savannah set down her fork, suddenly losing her appetite. These people? Preston didn't seem to notice her tone. You know what I mean. The ambitious ones who come from different backgrounds. They understand that perception matters as much as performance in places like your father's firm. Smart of him, really. Smart of him to help someone having a medical emergency. Smart of him to make sure everyone saw him being helpful. Look, I'm not criticizing the guy. I'm just saying he understands the game. My father's been dealing with similar situations in his developments. You hire talented people from diverse backgrounds. They work twice as hard to prove themselves, and everyone benefits. But you have to understand their motivation. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Constance and Richard Weatherby, longtime family friends who owned one of Chicago's most successful commercial real estate firms. Preston immediately stood to greet them, his demeanor shifting into the polished charm that made him so successful in business social situations. Preston, dear boy, Constance air-kissed his cheeks before turning to Savannah. And Savannah, sweetheart, how are you handling all the changes at your father's firm? Changes? Savannah asked, though she suspected she knew what Constance meant. All the new diversity initiatives. Richard tells me your father has been quite aggressive about recruitment lately. Very forward-thinking of Harrison, though I wonder if some of the older clients are adjusting well. Richard Weatherby nodded sagely. It's a delicate balance. You want to modernize, of course, but you also have to consider your established relationships. Some clients have been with the same firms for generations. They expect a certain level of continuity. The euphemisms were carefully chosen, but Savannah understood the underlying message. Diversity was acceptable as long as it didn't disrupt the comfort or expectations of wealthy white clients. Change was fine in theory, but problematic in practice. Mrs. Pemberton seems quite satisfied with her new portfolio manager, Savannah said, testing the waters. Constance raised an eyebrow. Eleanor mentioned something about unconventional investment suggestions. I hope she's not being pressured into anything too experimental. She's not being pressured into anything. She specifically requested additional research. Well, Eleanor has always been sharper than people realize, Richard conceded. But at her age, she might not fully understand the implications of some of these newer investment approaches. Community development funds sound progressive, but the returns can be unpredictable. Preston leaned forward slightly. The important thing is making sure clients understand all the risks involved. Sometimes enthusiasm can overshadow practical considerations. The conversation continued around her, but Savannah found herself only half listening. Instead, she was processing the assumptions embedded in every comment. That Jerome's qualifications were suspect, that his recommendations were experimental rather than well-researched, that elderly clients needed protection from his enthusiasm rather than benefit from his expertise. These weren't overtly racist observations. They were concerned, reasonable-sounding assessments from successful people who genuinely believed they were looking out for everyone's best interests. Yet underneath the diplomatic language, Savannah heard something that made her deeply uncomfortable. The assumption that Jerome couldn't be trusted to know what was best for clients, despite his impressive credentials and proven performance. After the Weatherbys left, Preston reached across the table and took her hand. "You've been quiet tonight. Is everything all right?" "I'm fine. Just processing some things. About the new employee? Savannah, you don't need to worry about him undermining your authority. Your father would never let that happen. And frankly, people like Washington understand their place. They're grateful for opportunities. They're not going to cause problems." The phrase, "people like Washington," echoed in her mind as they left the restaurant. Preston had meant it as reassurance, but it sounded more like a threat. The implication was that Jerome should know his place, should be grateful rather than confident, should defer to established hierarchies rather than challenge them with inconvenient competence. As Preston walked her to her car, he kissed her goodnight, with the casual assumption of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Don't overthink things, darling. Your father built that firm by trusting his instincts about people, and he raised you to have the same good judgment. Trust yourself." Driving home through the quiet streets of Lincoln Park, Savannah wondered if trusting herself meant questioning everything she'd been taught to believe about merit, opportunity, and the natural order of success. The people she loved most, her parents, Preston, family friends like the Weatherbys, weren't malicious or intentionally discriminatory. They were simply operating from assumptions that had served them well for generations. But what if those assumptions were wrong? What if competence and character weren't always packaged in familiar forms? What if her elevated position had given her a view of the world that was limited rather than comprehensive? The questions followed her home, where her penthouse apartment felt more like a fortress than a sanctuary. From her windows, Chicago spread out below her like a map of possibilities she'd never bothered to explore, populated by people whose stories she'd never thought to learn. The opportunity for honest conversation came unexpectedly on a Friday afternoon when Savannah found herself alone with Jerome in the break room on the executive floor. Most of the senior staff had left early for weekend plans, but both of them were staying late to prepare for Monday's client presentations. Savannah had been rehearsing various approaches to this conversation for days, but when the moment arrived, her carefully planned questions evaporated. Instead, she found herself asking the most direct question she could manage. "Jerome, can I ask you something personal?" He looked up from his coffee with mild surprise. They'd barely spoken since the lobby incident with Mrs. Pemberton, and their interactions had been strictly professional, polite but distant. "Of course, Ms. Ashford. When you helped Leonard during his medical emergency, was that strategic?" The question hung between them, more revealing than Savannah had intended. Jerome studied her face for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a recognition that this conversation might be important. "Strategic how?" he asked carefully. "Preston suggested that you were being helpful because there were witnesses around, that it was good for your reputation within the company." Jerome was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd expected. "Ms. Ashford, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When you see me helping Leonard or mentoring other employees or suggesting investment strategies that include community development, what do you think my motivation is?" The question caught her off guard because it required her to examine her own assumptions rather than defend them. I'm not sure. I grew up in Bronzeville on the South Side," Jerome said quietly. "My mother cleaned office buildings downtown for 20 years. She'd come home exhausted every night, but she never complained because that job put food on our table and kept me in school. When I was 12, she had a heart attack at work." Savannah felt her chest tighten. The office manager where she worked, a white woman about your age, stayed with her until the paramedics arrived, held her hand, called me and my sister, made sure we got to the hospital safely. She didn't have to do any of that. My mother was just the night cleaning lady." Jerome paused, looking out the window at the Chicago skyline. "That woman's name was Patricia Caldwell, and she probably saved my mother's life. Not because it was strategic, not because there were witnesses, but because she saw my mother as a human being who deserved compassion." The story hit Savannah like a physical blow. She'd asked about strategic calculation, but Jerome had responded. with a lesson about basic humanity. Is that why you helped Leonard? She asked quietly. I helped Leonard because he was scared and in pain, and I had the ability to help him feel less alone. Same reason I mentor other employees, because someone mentored me when I was starting out, and it made all the difference. Savannah stared into her coffee, processing the implications of his words. I've never thought about work that way. What? Way? As a community. As a place where people take care of each other. She looked up at him, feeling vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since childhood. I was raised to think about hierarchies, protocols, appropriate boundaries between different levels of employees. Jerome nodded slowly. Those things matter too. Structure is important, but structure without humanity becomes just machinery. Is that how you see this place? As machinery? Sometimes, he admitted, but I also see potential for something better. Your father hired me because my work speaks for itself, but I stay because I believe this firm could be a model for what success looks like when it includes everyone. The phrase struck her as naive and idealistic, but she found herself wanting to understand rather than dismiss it. What would that look like? It would look like Mrs. Pemberton getting investment advice that maximizes her returns while also building stronger communities. It would look like junior employees seeing clear paths for advancement based on performance rather than connections. It would look like senior management that understands that talent comes in many different packages. Jerome's voice remained calm and professional, but Savannah heard passion underneath his words. Not anger or resentment, but genuine hope for something better. You think I don't recognize talent? She asked. I think you recognize talent that looks familiar, he replied carefully. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have blind spots based on our experiences. But leadership means learning to see potential even when it doesn't match your expectations. The criticism was delivered so gently that it took Savannah a moment to realize how deeply it cut. Jerome wasn't attacking her character or her competence. He was suggesting that her perspective might be limited by the very advantages that had shaped her success. I've been successful by trusting my instincts about people, she said, feeling the need to defend herself. And your instincts are probably very good for recognizing certain types of people. But what if there are other types of people whose value you haven't learned to see yet? The question was asked without judgment, but it challenged everything Savannah had been taught about merit, achievement, and natural hierarchies. If her instincts were limited rather than simply refined, what did that say about all the decisions she'd made based on those instincts? Jerome, she said finally, when I questioned your portfolio recommendations in front of Mrs. Pemberton, what did you think? Honestly? He considered his words carefully. I thought you were protecting what you knew rather than exploring what you didn't know. And I understood why. Change feels risky when you're responsible for other people's money. But I also thought Mrs. Pemberton deserved to make informed decisions based on all available information, not just information that matched traditional approaches. The assessment was fair, but painful. Savannah realized she'd been so focused on maintaining established protocols that she'd forgotten her primary responsibility was serving clients' best interests, not preserving familiar methods. I owe you an apology, she said quietly, and I owe Mrs. Pemberton better service than I was providing. Jerome's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him since they'd started working together. Ms. Ashford, recognizing room for growth isn't a weakness, it's leadership. Your father didn't hire me to maintain the status quo. He hired me because he understood that serving clients well means constantly learning and improving. As they prepared to leave the office, Savannah felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding of success, leadership, and her own place in the world. For the first time in her adult life, she wondered if the advantages she'd inherited might also be limitations, and whether true growth meant learning to see beyond the boundaries of her own experience. The crisis came during the firm's annual diversity and inclusion presentation to the Chicago Financial Services Council, where Harrison Ashford was scheduled to speak about Ashford and Associates' commitment to progressive hiring practices. It was exactly the kind of high-profile event that burnished the firm's reputation and attracted the right kind of attention from potential clients and regulatory bodies. Savannah arrived at the downtown Hilton Conference Center, expecting a routine corporate presentation. But the atmosphere in the ballroom was tense. Protesters had gathered outside the hotel, carrying signs that read, "Investment Justice and Community Wealth, Not Wall Street Wealth." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see news cameras and reporters interviewing demonstration organizers. "What's all this about?" she asked Marcus Chen, who was setting up the presentation materials. "Some community organization published a report yesterday about investment firms that claim to support community development but actually steer money away from underserved neighborhoods," Marcus explained. "They're calling it virtue signaling, without substance." Savannah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Are we mentioned in the report?" "Not specifically, but the timing is awkward. Your father's whole presentation is about our commitment to diverse investment strategies." As the conference session began, Harrison took the stage with his usual confidence, but Savannah could see the strain around his eyes. The presentation proceeded smoothly through slides about hiring statistics, employee development programs, and client satisfaction metrics. Then came the question and answer session. "Mr. Ashford," called out a young black woman from the audience, "your firm claims to support community development through investment strategies, but how many of your clients are actually investing in minority-owned businesses or community development funds?" Harrison paused slightly. "We offer those options to all our clients and provide comprehensive research to support informed decision-making." "That's not what I asked," the woman pressed. "How many of your clients are actually making those investments? What percentage of your total assets under management go toward community development?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Savannah knew the answer, and it was embarrassing. Less than 3% of their total portfolio was invested in the community development funds that Jerome had been promoting. Despite all their progressive rhetoric, the vast majority of their clients chose traditional investment strategies that kept wealth circulating within established networks. "We believe in client autonomy," Harrison replied carefully. "Our role is to provide options and analysis, not to pressure clients into specific investment decisions." A murmur went through the audience. Several reporters were taking notes, and Savannah saw a few attendees exchanging skeptical looks. Her father's answer was technically accurate, but missed the deeper point about whether Ashford and Associates was genuinely committed to economic justice or simply offering token options to wealthy clients who were unlikely to choose them. During the break, Savannah stepped outside for air and found Jerome Washington standing near the hotel entrance, watching the protesters with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Your father asked me to be available in case there were technical questions about the community development portfolios." His voice was neutral, but she heard something underneath it. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. "The questions got pretty pointed in there," Jerome nodded. "They were fair questions." "Fair?" "Ms. Ashford, your father hired me to develop investment strategies that serve underserved communities. I've created detailed proposals for several major clients, including analysis showing how these investments could increase their returns while building economic infrastructure in neighborhoods that need it. But most of those proposals are sitting in files, unused." The accusation was gentle, but devastating. Jerome had been doing exactly what he'd been hired to do, but the firm's actual impact remained minimal because their clients weren't interested in investments that challenged familiar patterns. "You can't force clients to make investments they're not comfortable with," Savannah said, feeling defensive. "No, you can't. But you can make it clear that these aren't charity investments. They're smart business decisions that happen to have positive social impact. You can present them as thoroughly researched opportunities rather than experimental alternatives. You can treat them as seriously as you treat traditional investments." Jerome's words hit her like a diagnosis she'd been avoiding. The firm's approach to community development investing had been half-hearted from the beginning, offering options but not advocating for them, providing research but not enthusiasm, presenting them as socially conscious alternatives rather than financially sound strategies. "What would you do differently?" she asked. "I'd start with Mrs. Pemberton. She's respected by other clients and she's genuinely interested in these investments. If she saw positive returns and talked about them at social events, other clients might become more open to considering similar strategies." The suggestion was logical, but it required a level of commitment that Savannah wasn't sure the firm was ready to make. Advocating for community development investments meant potentially challenging clients' comfort zones and assumptions about risk and return. "Jerome," she said carefully, "what if we presented your Mrs. Pemberton proposal to the full senior partnership? Made it a showcase for what these investments could achieve?" His expression shifted slightly. Hope mixed with wariness. "You'd support that?" "I'd support giving Mrs. Pemberton the best possible service, which means presenting her with opportunities that match her interests and financial goals." As they walked back into the hotel, Savannah realized she was committing to something that might change not just her client relationships, but her understanding of what it meant to be a responsible financial advisor. Supporting Jerome's proposal meant acknowledging that her previous approach had been inadequate, not malicious, but limited by assumptions she'd never bothered to examine. Inside the ballroom, her father was fielding more questions from an increasingly skeptical audience. The protesters outside were chanting slogans that carried through the windows, and several attendees were checking their phones for news coverage of the demonstration. "Mr. Ashford," called out another questioner, "given the growing demand for socially responsible investing, how is your firm preparing to meet clients where their values are?" Harrison's answer was polished but generic, the kind of corporate response that satisfied no one while offending no one. Watching him navigate the hostile questions, Savannah realized that her father was trapped by the same limitations that had constrained her own thinking. He genuinely wanted to do better, but he didn't know how to balance progressive ideals with the conservative expectations of his established client base. The solution, she realized, wasn't choosing between idealism and pragmatism. It was demonstrating that the best business decisions often aligned with broader social benefits. Jerome's investment strategies weren't charity disguised as finance. They were sophisticated financial tools that happened to build community wealth while generating competitive returns. As the conference ended and attendees filed out past the continuing protests, Savannah made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She would champion Jerome's Mrs. Pemberton proposal not because it was socially responsible, but because it was smart business that would serve their client better than traditional approaches. The choice felt like stepping off a cliff, but for the first time in months, she was excited about the direction she was heading. The senior partners meeting the following Monday morning was unlike any Savannah had experienced in her 5 years at Ashford and Associates. The conference room was packed with all 7 senior partners, Harrison presiding from the head of the mahogany table, and an unusual energy in the air that suggested everyone understood they were addressing more than routine business. "Before we begin," Harrison announced, "I want to acknowledge that last week's conference raised important questions about our commitment to the community development investments we've been promoting. Savannah has asked to present a proposal that might address some of those concerns." Savannah stood, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to suggest. For the past weekend, she'd worked with Jerome to develop a comprehensive presentation that would reframe community development investing not as social experimentation, but as sophisticated portfolio management. "Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton has been our client for 40 years, she began. "Her portfolio currently generates steady returns through traditional investments, but our analysis shows we can increase her annual returns by 2 to 3%, while reducing overall volatility by incorporating community development funds into her strategy." She clicked to the first slide, which showed Mrs. Pemberton's current portfolio alongside Jerome's proposed modifications. The numbers were compelling: higher returns, lower risk, and measurable community impact that would generate positive publicity for both the client and the firm. Jerome Washington has identified 12 community development funds with 10-year track records that consistently outperform the S&P 500, Savannah continued. These aren't experimental investments. They're established funds managed by experienced professionals who understand both community needs and market dynamics. Claudia Thornton leaned forward slightly. What's Mrs. Pemberton's response to this proposal? She's enthusiastic, Savannah replied. She specifically requested detailed research and wants to implement the strategy over the next 6 months. More importantly, she's mentioned it to several friends at the Union Club, and 3 of them have asked for similar presentations. A murmur went around the table. The Union Club represented old Chicago money, families who'd been wealthy for generations and whose investment decisions influenced entire social networks. If Mrs. Pemberton was endorsing community development funds at Union Club events, other wealthy families would pay attention. What are the potential downsides? Asked Robert Steinberg, the firm's managing partner. Savannah had anticipated this question. The main risk is that we're challenging clients' preconceptions about what constitutes a safe investment. But Jerome's research shows that the actual financial risk is lower than traditional portfolios, and the reputational benefits could attract younger, wealthy clients who prioritize social responsibility. Harrison spoke for the first time since her presentation began. Savannah, are you recommending that we make community development investing a standard part of our client presentations? I'm recommending that we treat it as seriously as any other investment strategy. Present it based on financial merit, not social consciousness. Let the community impact be a bonus rather than the primary selling point. Jerome had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, available for technical questions, but not participating in the discussion. Harrison turned to him now. Mr. Washington, do you believe this approach is scalable across our entire client base? Yes, sir, Jerome replied without hesitation. I've analyzed portfolios for clients at every wealth level we serve. The strategies work equally well for $2 million portfolios and $20 million portfolios. The key is matching specific community development funds to each client's risk tolerance and return expectations. Robert Steinberg looked skeptical. What happens if these investments underperform? Community development sounds progressive, but our clients trust us with their wealth because we prioritize returns over social engineering. Savannah felt the familiar tension between idealism and pragmatism, but this time she was prepared for it. Robert, these funds have outperformed traditional investments for the past decade. We're not asking clients to sacrifice returns for social impact. We're showing them how to achieve better returns that happen to create positive social impact. The distinction was crucial. By framing community development investing as superior financial strategy rather than charitable giving, she was asking partners to evaluate the proposal on purely business terms. I move that we approve Mrs. Pemberton's portfolio modification as a pilot program, declared Claudia Thornton. If the results match the projections over 6 months, we can consider expanding the approach to other interested clients. The vote was unanimous, but Savannah knew the real test would come in implementation. Selling community development funds to wealthy clients required confidence in both the financial strategy and its social benefits, a combination that challenged everything she'd been taught about maintaining appropriate boundaries between business and social consciousness. After the meeting, Jerome lingered in the conference room while other partners filed out. Ms. Ashford, thank you for presenting the proposal. I know it wasn't easy to advocate for strategies that challenge traditional approaches. Jerome, I need you to understand something, she replied. I'm not supporting your proposal because I've become a social activist. I'm supporting it because I believe it will serve our clients better than what we've been offering them. He smiled. That's exactly why it will work. When you present investments based on financial merit rather than social obligation, clients respond to the business case rather than feeling pressured to support causes they may not understand. But the social impact matters too, she admitted. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned that she'd like her wealth to contribute to building stronger communities. She sees it as leaving a positive legacy rather than just accumulating money. That's the most powerful combination, Jerome agreed. When financial success and social benefit align, everyone wins. Clients, communities, and firms like ours that facilitate the connection. As they walked toward the elevator, Savannah realized that her transformation wasn't about abandoning business principles for social consciousness. It was about discovering that the best business decisions often created benefits beyond immediate financial returns. Jerome's investment strategies weren't charity disguised as finance. They were sophisticated approaches that generated superior results while building community wealth. The elevator doors closed, and Savannah caught her reflection. In the polished metal, she looked the same as she had 3 months ago, but something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of success, leadership, and her responsibility to use her position for more than just preserving familiar patterns. For the first time in her career, she was excited about the broader impact of her work, not just its immediate results. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. The Ashford and Associates annual Christmas party was legendary in Chicago financial circles. A black tie affair held in the Art Institute's modern wing, where crystal chandeliers illuminated conversations worth millions of dollars and champagne flowed as freely as investment advice. Savannah had attended dozens of similar events, but this year felt different. She was no longer simply representing family tradition. She was carrying the weight of decisions that could reshape the firm's future. Preston found her near the Monet exhibition, adjusting his bow tie with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place at such gatherings. "You look stunning tonight," he murmured, kissing her cheek. "And I hear congratulations are in order. Dad mentioned that your community development project got approved by the partners." "It's not a project, Preston. It's a new investment strategy that we're implementing because it generates superior returns for our clients." Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. "Of course. I just meant it's good to see the firm embracing modern approaches. Very forward-thinking." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, who approached them with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. At 82, she was elegantly dressed in midnight blue silk and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire rather than simply inherited one. "Savannah, dear, I want to introduce you to Margaret Chen from the Kensington Group. I've been telling her about our new investment approach." Margaret Chen was roughly Savannah's age, with the kind of polished competence that suggested she'd earned her position through performance rather than connections. "Mrs. Pemberton has been raving about your portfolio modifications. The returns sound impressive." "Jerome Washington developed the strategy," Savannah replied. "He's our junior portfolio manager, the one who identified the community development funds that are generating those returns." Preston's smile tightened slightly. Across the room, Savannah could see Jerome speaking with Leonard Kowalski, who had returned to work the previous week and insisted on attending the party despite his recent health scare. The sight of them together, the Harvard-educated analyst and the maintenance supervisor talking as equals, would have bothered her 3 months ago. Tonight it looked like genuine human connection. "I'd love to meet him," Margaret said. "Kensington is always looking for innovative approaches to wealth." "Management! Jerome!" Savannah called out, gesturing for him to join their group. As he approached, she was struck again by his quiet confidence. The way he moved through the party with comfort but not presumption, greeting people at every level of the company hierarchy with the same respectful attention. "Mrs. Chen, I'd like you to meet Jerome Washington, the portfolio manager who developed the investment strategy Mrs. Pemberton has been telling you about." Jerome shook Margaret's hand with professional warmth. "Ms. Chen, it's a pleasure. Mrs. Pemberton has been an ideal client for implementing these strategies. She understood immediately that community development investing represents sophisticated portfolio management rather than charitable giving." "That's exactly what intrigued me," Margaret replied. Can you explain how you identify which community development funds offer the best risk-adjusted returns? As Jerome began explaining his analytical approach, Savannah noticed that Preston had stepped away from the conversation and was speaking quietly with Richard Weatherby near the bar. Both men were looking in Jerome's direction with expressions that seemed less than enthusiastic. "Excuse me?" she told the group, and walked over to join Preston and Richard. "Just saying that clients, like Margaret Chen, respond to confidence," Richard was saying. "Sometimes people get promoted beyond their experience level and don't realize they need to be more deferential in client presentations." "What are you talking about?" Savannah asked. Preston looked uncomfortable. Richard was just observing that Washington seems very comfortable presenting to potential clients. Maybe too comfortable for someone who's been with the firm less than 6 months. The criticism hit Savannah like cold water. 3 months ago, she might have agreed that Jerome was being presumptuous. Now she recognized the comment as exactly the kind of coded language that kept talented people confined to narrow roles based on others' comfort levels rather than their own competence. Jerome is presenting to potential clients because he's the person who developed the strategies they're interested in learning about, she said firmly. "Would you prefer that I explain investment approaches I didn't create, or that Mrs. Pemberton present strategies she's not qualified to analyze?" Richard raised his hands in mock surrender. "Of course not, dear. I just think there's value in maintaining appropriate structure in client relationships." "What kind of structure, Richard?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that everyone understood, but no one wanted to articulate. Richard was suggesting that Jerome should be less visible, less confident, more aware of his place in the company hierarchy. The criticism wasn't about his competence. It was about his failure to behave like someone who should be grateful for opportunities rather than confident in his abilities. "I think Jerome is representing our firm exactly as he should be," Savannah said, her voice carrying just enough edge to make her position clear. "He's knowledgeable, professional, and delivering results that are attracting new business. That's what we want from our portfolio managers." Preston touched her arm gently. "Darling, no one's questioning his competence. Richard is just suggesting that client development requires a certain finesse that comes from experience. Preston, Jerome has 3 years of experience at Goldman Sachs and an MBA from University of Chicago. His client development skills are excellent, which is why Mrs. Pemberton specifically requested that he present to her friends at the Union Club next month." The mention of the Union Club presentation silenced both men. In their world, invitations to present investment strategies at exclusive social clubs represented the highest form of professional recognition, acknowledgement that someone had earned the trust of Chicago's most influential families. "Mrs. Pemberton requested that specifically?" Richard asked. "She told me she wants her friends to hear directly from the person who developed the strategies that are generating her improved returns. She said Jerome's analysis was the most thorough and insightful she'd received in 40 years of working with investment advisors." The endorsement was unassailable. Mrs. Pemberton's opinion carried more weight in Chicago financial circles than any corporate hierarchy or social assumption. If she believed Jerome deserved recognition, no one could legitimately question his qualifications or competence. As the conversation ended and Richard drifted away, Preston pulled Savannah aside. "Are you sure you want to champion this guy so publicly? It's great that he's performing well, but attaching your reputation to his success could be risky if things don't work out." The comment revealed everything Savannah needed to understand about Preston's worldview. He saw Jerome's success as inherently fragile, something that might collapse and damage anyone associated with it. He couldn't imagine that supporting talented colleagues was simply good business rather than risky charity. "Preston, Jerome's success is my success because we're working together to serve our clients better. That's how business is supposed to work." "Of course, but you have to think about how things look to other people. Some clients might prefer working with more traditional approaches." The euphemism was gentler than Richard Weatherby's comments, but it carried the same message. Jerome's confidence and competence made some people uncomfortable, and Savannah should consider that discomfort rather than simply focusing on results. Looking around the party, at the wealthy families who dominated Chicago finance for generations, at the social structures that had shaped her entire life, at the assumptions that had guided every major decision she'd ever made, Savannah realized she was at a crossroads that would define not just her career, but her character. She could maintain the comfortable patterns that had always served her well, or she could commit fully to the changes she'd begun implementing. The choice wasn't just about business strategy, it was about what kind of leader she wanted to become and what kind of world she wanted to help create. "Preston," she said quietly, "I think Jerome Washington is the most talented portfolio manager our firm has ever hired. I think his investment strategies are going to transform how our clients build wealth while contributing to their communities. And I think anyone who can't see that is making a mistake that will cost them opportunities." The statement was public, definitive, and irrevocable. By championing Jerome's abilities so directly, she was staking her professional reputation on his continued success while simultaneously challenging everyone around her to examine their own assumptions about talent, merit, and appropriate recognition. As she walked back toward Jerome's conversation with Margaret Chen and Mrs. Pemberton, Savannah felt lighter than she had in months. For the first time in her life, she was using her privilege and position to amplify someone else's talents rather than simply protecting her own advantages. The choice felt like the beginning of something important rather than the end of something comfortable.